Steve Harvey had interviewed thousands of people, celebrities, politicians, heroes, liars, people who cried on cue, and people who never cried at all. He thought he could read a man within the first 30 seconds, but that day, something felt off. The audience didn't notice it at first. They saw what everyone saw: a well-dressed man in his early 40s, calm posture, confident smile, a wedding ring that caught the light just enough to be noticed. A resume that sounded almost unreal: successful entrepreneur, devoted husband, father of two, volunteer mentor, donor to children's charities. The kind of man people point to and say, "This is what success looks like." Steve welcomed him warmly. "So tell me," Steve said, smiling. "People at home see the suit, the smile, the success. But who are you, really?" The man laughed softly. "I'm just someone who worked hard, stayed disciplined, and made the right choices." The audience nodded. They liked him instantly. Steve leaned back in his chair. "You know," he said, "a lot of people watching tonight wish they had your life." The man hesitated for just a fraction of a second, barely noticeable, but Steve saw it. "That's why I'm here," the man said, "because they don't know the whole story." The room shifted. Steve's smile softened. "All right," he said gently. "Let's talk about it." The man took a breath. "I've spent my entire adult life trying to be perfect." A polite chuckle from the crowd. "I thought if I could build the right image, the past would stop chasing me." The word past landed heavier than expected. Steve straightened in his seat. "What do you mean by that?" he asked. The man looked out at the audience, then down at his hands, then back up again. "I wasn't always this man." The lights felt brighter, the studio quieter. "I grew up angry," he continued. "Poor, invisible. I learned early that if you wanted power, you took it." Steve didn't interrupt. "When I was 22, I made a decision that changed someone else's life forever." The audience stopped shifting in their seats. "I told myself it was survival," the man said. "I told myself it was necessary." Steve's voice lowered. "What kind of decision?" The man swallowed. "I ruined someone." A murmur moved through the crowd. "I betrayed a friend, someone who trusted me completely. I took everything from him: his job, his reputation, his future, and I walked away richer." Steve's expression froze. The man's voice didn't shake. "That man never recovered." Silence. Steve leaned forward. "And you never told anyone?" The man shook his head. "I buried it, and I built a perfect life on top of it." A long pause. Steve's voice was quiet now. "Why tell this story today?" The man looked directly at Steve. "Because he's watching." A sharp inhale rippled through the audience. "He's here," the man continued, "in this room." Steve's eyes widened slightly. The camera cut to the crowd. Rows of faces. Confused, curious, uneasy. Steve turned back. "You're saying the man you hurt is sitting out there right now?" The man nodded. "I didn't know he'd be here," he said. "But the past has a way of showing up when you least expect it." Steve stood up slowly. "All right," he said. "Let's take a breath." The room was so quiet you could hear fabric shift. Steve scanned the audience. "Sir," he said calmly, "can you stand up?" Somewhere in the crowd, a man rose. No suit, no confident smile, just tired eyes and a face marked by time. The perfect man on stage couldn't look at him. Steve's voice cracked slightly. "You knew this day might come," Steve said, "didn't you?" The man nodded once. "Yes." And that's when Steve realized this wasn't a confession. It was a reckoning. The man in the audience stood frozen. He didn't wave, didn't smile, didn't look for the camera. He simply stood there, as if the weight of the room had pressed him into the floor. Steve took a slow step forward. "Sir," Steve said carefully, "what's your name?" The man hesitated. "Daniel," he replied. His voice was flat, not angry, not emotional, just tired. Steve nodded. "Daniel," he said, "do you know the man sitting on this stage?" Daniel looked at him. This time, there was no hesitation. "Yes." The perfect man finally turned around. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the mask cracked. Not completely, but enough. Steve felt it. The audience felt it. This was no longer a talk show. This was unfinished history. "How long has it been?" Steve asked. Daniel exhaled. 17 years. 17. Steve repeated it quietly, letting the number sink in. 17 years, he said. "That's a long time to carry something." Daniel nodded once. "I carried it every day." The man on stage lowered his head. Steve turned to him. "You said you made a decision at 22, Steve said. "What did you do?" The man closed his eyes. "I was working at a financial firm," he began. "Entry level, barely making rent. Daniel was my closest friend. He helped me get the job." Daniel's jaw tightened. "We were both hungry," the man continued, "both trying to escape the same life." Steve listened closely. "There was an opportunity," the man said. "A promotion. One position, one future." The audience leaned in. "I found a way to make sure I got it." Steve's voice was firm now. "How?" The man opened his eyes. "I framed him." A collective gasp filled the studio. "I altered records," he said. "Moved numbers. Planted evidence. I made it look like Daniel committed fraud." Steve didn't blink. "What happened to him?" The man swallowed hard. "He was fired. Blacklisted. No firm would touch him." Daniel's hands clenched at his sides. "I testified against him," the man added. "I looked him in the eye and lied." The silence was brutal. Steve turned back to Daniel. "Is that true?" Steve asked. Daniel nodded. "I lost everything," he said. "My job, my reputation, my confidence." His voice remained steady, but something beneath it cracked. "I spent years trying to prove my innocence," Daniel continued. "But once your name is stained, it never fully comes clean." Steve felt his chest tighten. "And you?" Steve asked, turning to the man on stage. "What happened to you?" The man didn't hesitate. "I was promoted," he said. "My career took off. Doors opened. People trusted me." He let out a hollow laugh. "I learned that doing the wrong thing worked." The audience shifted uncomfortably. "I told myself I'd make it right someday," he said. "I told myself I'd confess when the timing was better." Steve shook his head slowly. "But the timing was never better," Steve said. "No," the man replied. "It never was." Steve turned back to Daniel. "What did it cost you?" Steve asked. Daniel looked up at the lights. "Everything I thought I'd be," he said. "I worked construction, night shifts. I watched my friends move forward while I stayed stuck." He paused. "I stopped trusting people." The words hit harder than anger ever could. Steve swallowed. "Why come here today?" Steve asked him. Daniel looked at the man on stage again. "Because I wanted to hear him say it," he said. "Out loud, in front of people." Steve nodded slowly. The man on stage stood up. His perfect posture was gone. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know that doesn't fix anything." Daniel didn't respond. Steve stepped between them. "Hold on," Steve said gently. "This isn't about a scripted apology." He turned to the man. "You spent 17 years building a life," Steve said. "A family, a reputation. Do they know?" The man hesitated. "No." The audience reacted instantly. Steve's voice sharpened. "So, you're respected for a success, built on a lie, Steve said. The man nodded. And Daniel lives with the consequences, Steve continued. Yes. Steve looked out at the crowd. This, he said, is what people don't understand about the past. He turned back. It doesn't disappear, Steve said. It waits. The man's voice trembled for the first time. I thought if I did enough good, he said, it would cancel out the bad. Steve shook his head. That's not how truth works, Steve said quietly. The room fell silent again. Steve turned to Daniel. What do you want now? He asked. Daniel took a long breath. I want the truth, he said. Not just here, everywhere. The man on stage went pale. Steve looked at him. You heard him, Steve said. Are you willing to lose what you built? The question hung in the air. The perfect man didn't answer. And that silence said everything. The silence stretched longer than anyone expected. The man on stage stared at the floor. Not at Steve, not at Daniel, at the space between his shoes. Steve waited. He had learned something over the years. When a man avoids eye contact, he isn't thinking about the truth. He's calculating the cost. Let me ask you something, Steve said calmly. If Daniel hadn't been here today, would you ever have told this story? The man didn't answer immediately. The audience held its breath. No, he said finally. I don't think I would have. The honesty landed harder than a lie. Steve nodded slowly. That's important, he said, because it tells us why the past came looking for you. The man looked up. I've tried to be a good person, he said. I've helped people. I've given money. I've done everything right since then. Steve raised his hand. I believe you, he said. But hear me carefully. He stepped closer. You didn't build a good life, Steve said. You built a quiet one. The words cut deep. Steve turned toward the audience. There's a difference, he said. A good life can survive the truth. A quiet life depends on hiding it. The man's jaw tightened. My kids don't deserve this, he said. My wife doesn't deserve to pay for my mistake. Steve's voice softened. You're right, he said. They don't. Steve paused. But neither did Daniel. That was the moment. The man's shoulders slumped. 17 years of control slipped away. I was afraid, the man admitted. If people knew who I really was, everything would collapse. Steve nodded. That's usually the fear, he said. But let me tell you something. He leaned in. What collapses isn't your life, Steve said. It's the illusion. Daniel remained standing, silent, still. Steve turned to him. Daniel, he said, if he tells the truth publicly, does it fix what you lost? Daniel thought for a moment. No, he said, but it tells the world I wasn't crazy, and that matters. Steve felt the weight of that answer. He turned back to the man on stage. You hear that? Steve asked. This isn't about punishment. He paused. It's about balance. The man wiped his face with his hand. What if I lose everything? He asked. Steve answered without hesitation. Then you'll finally be standing on something real. The audience erupted into applause. Not loud, not celebratory, but heavy. The kind of applause that comes from recognition. Steve held up his hand. Listen, he said. Applause won't make this easier. He looked at the man. This is the moment, Steve said. You either protect the image or you honor the truth. The man turned toward Daniel. I can't undo what I did, he said, but I will tell the truth. To my company, to my family, to anyone who needs to hear it. Daniel studied him. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Daniel nodded. That's all I came for, he said. Steve exhaled slowly. He looked into the camera. There are people watching right now, Steve said, who think their past is buried. He shook his head. It's not. Steve's voice grew firmer. It's patient. The man on stage sank back into his chair. No longer perfect, no longer polished, just human. Steve turned back to him one last time. Whatever happens next, Steve said, this is the first honest day of your life. The man nodded. Tears finally came, and for the first time, they didn't look like weakness, they looked like relief. The cameras stopped rolling shortly after, but the story didn't end there, because the truth never ends when the lights go out. It begins. Within weeks, the man did exactly what he said he would. He confessed to his company, to the board, to the clients who trusted his name. The promotion he once stole came back to haunt him. He resigned before he could be removed. News traveled fast, not in headlines, in whispers, the kind that follow you into rooms you once owned. His reputation cracked, then collapsed. Friends stopped calling, invitations disappeared. The perfect life he built so carefully unraveled quietly. At home, the conversation was harder. His wife didn't scream. That hurt more. She listened. She asked questions. And when she realized the man she loved was built on a lie, she never consented to live inside. She walked away, not with anger, with clarity. Steve would later say that was the moment he understood something important. Consequences don't arrive to destroy you. They arrive to correct the story. Meanwhile, something else happened. Daniel received a call from the same firm that once erased his name. An internal investigation reopened the case. The records were reviewed. The truth finally documented. 17 years late, but real. Daniel's name was cleared. There was no parade, no apology big enough to return the years. But something shifted. When people searched his name now, they saw the truth. Steve invited Daniel back months later. This time, he sat on the couch, not in the shadows, not standing. Steve looked at him and smiled gently. "How does it feel?" Steve asked. "To finally be seen?" Daniel thought for a moment. "It doesn't give me back what I lost," he said, "but it gives me peace." Steve nodded. Then he said something the audience never forgot. "Peace isn't the reward for perfection," Steve said. "It's the reward for honesty." The clip went viral. Millions watched. Many judged the man who fell. Some felt sorry for him, but most people didn't talk about him at all. They talked about themselves, about the lie they never corrected, the shortcut they justified, the person they quietly hurt and hoped would disappear. Steve closed the show with one final thought. He looked into the camera. "Everybody has a past," he said, "but the ones who pretend they don't are the ones most afraid of the future." The studio went silent, not because there was nothing left to say, but because everyone knew. The truth had already said it all.